In the bustling financial district of downtown Chicago, the polished marble floors and tall glass windows of Premier National Bank reflected the morning sunlight. Sarah Thompson stood at the entrance, clutching her worn leather purse, her heart beating a little faster than usual. At 38, she'd grown accustomed to the subtle looks and microaggressions that often accompanied her presence in certain spaces, but today was different. Today, she was here to make a significant investment decision about her privately owned tech company, a fact unknown to anyone inside those imposing doors. As she approached the help desk, Sarah smoothed down her simple black blazer, a habit she developed over years of walking into rooms where she was often the only black woman present. The pristine interior of the bank seemed to amplify every click of her heels against the floor, drawing curious glances from both customers and employees alike. "I'd like to speak with someone about investment opportunities," Sarah said quietly to the receptionist, who barely glanced up from her computer screen. "The basic savings accounts are handled by our regular tellers," the receptionist replied dismissively, gesturing toward the general banking line. "You might want to start there." Sarah took a deep breath, maintaining her composure. "Actually, I'm interested in discussing private wealth management options. I have an appointment with a financial advisor." The receptionist's perfectly manicured fingers paused over her keyboard. She looked up, her eyes scanning Sarah from head to toe, lingering on her simple gold wedding band and modest watch. "Are you sure you're in the right place? Our wealth management services typically require minimum investments of $5 million. Yes, I'm aware." Sarah interrupted softly, her voice steady despite the familiar stain of prejudgment. "My appointment is for 9:30. Before the receptionist could respond, a young banker walking past the desk did a double take. He stepped forward, straightening his tie. "I can assist you with opening a basic checking account if you like. We have some great starter options for new customers." The heat of embarrassment crept up Sarah's neck, but years of being underestimated in the tech industry had taught her patience. She reached into her purse and retrieved her business card, CEO and founder of Innovatech Solutions, a company she'd built from the ground up over the last decade. The ambient chatter in the lobby seemed to dim as the young banker's eyes widened, recognition finally dawning on his face. Her company had just been featured in Forbes for its groundbreaking artificial intelligence solutions, with a valuation that would make most of the bank's clients take notice. Sarah could feel the shift in the air, the sudden scrambling to correct a grievous misjudgment. The receptionist's face had turned an interesting shade of pink, her fingers now flying across the keyboard with newfound urgency. The young banker had taken several steps back, his previous confidence evaporating like morning dew. But this wasn't about embarrassing anyone or proving a point. Sarah had faced these moments throughout her career, in venture capital meetings, at technology conferences, and now here. Each time, she chose to respond with grace, knowing that her success spoke louder than any reaction ever could. As she stood there, watching the bank's wealth management director hurrying across the lobby toward her, Sarah couldn't help but think about how many others like her had been turned away, dismissed, or underestimated. How many dreams had been deferred because someone decided to judge the book by its cover. The real question wasn't about what would happen next in this bank. The question was, how would this moment change the way these people viewed the next person who walked through those doors? The wealth management director, Mr. Richardson, a silver-haired man in his early 60s, approached with an outstretched hand and an overly warm smile. "Ms. Thompson, please accept our sincerest apologies for the confusion. Let me personally escort you to our executive conference room." Sarah noticed how quickly the atmosphere had shifted. The same employees who had dismissed her moments ago were now stealing glances, whispering behind cupped hands. She followed Mr. Richardson through a maze of hallways, her mind drifting back to the day she started Innovatech Solutions in her tiny apartment's spare bedroom. 10 years ago, she had walked into dozens of banks just like this one, seeking a small business loan. Door after door had closed in her face. Too risky, they said. Not enough collateral, they claimed. But Sarah knew the unspoken truth that hung in the air during each rejection. They couldn't see past their own preconceptions to recognize her potential. The conference room was impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. As Sarah took her seat at the massive mahogany table, Mr. Richardson frantically called for his assistant to bring in coffee and pastries. "We're absolutely thrilled to have you considering our services," he gushed, laying out glossy brochures about their premium investment packages. But Sarah's attention was drawn to a young black intern who had been tasked with serving the coffee. The girl's hands trembled slightly as she set down the cup, and their eyes met in a moment of silent understanding. Sarah saw in her the same fire, the same determination she had carried all those years ago. "Before we discuss investment options," Sarah said, turning back to Mr. Richardson, "I'd like to hear about your bank's initiatives for supporting minority-owned businesses." The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud, and she watched as he shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. "Well, we certainly have several programs in development," he stammered, shuffling through his papers as if the answer might materialize among them. "Perhaps we could focus first on your portfolio requirements." Sarah leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but firm. "My portfolio requirements are directly tied to your answer, Mr. Richardson. You see, I believe in investing not just money, but in people and their potential." The intern had paused by the door, pretending to arrange the coffee service while listening intently. Sarah could feel the weight of her attention, the silent hope in her presence. This moment wasn't just about making a point or securing an investment. It was about creating ripples that could become waves of change. Mr. Richardson dabbed at his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief, clearly unprepared for this turn in the conversation. "Perhaps I should bring in our diversity and inclusion coordinator to better address your concerns." "That would be wonderful," Sarah replied, knowing full well that the position probably didn't exist. "While we wait, why don't you tell me about the last minority-owned business your bank approved for a major loan?" The silence that followed was deafening. Through the conference room's glass walls, Sarah could see the morning hustle of the bank continuing. People making deposits, discussing loans, planning their financial futures. But here in this room, something different was unfolding. A conversation that needed to happen, a truth that needed to be faced. The young intern still hadn't left the room, her presence a silent testimony to the importance of this moment. Sarah caught her eye again and gave her a subtle nod. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest gestures, and Sarah Thompson was about to show this bank exactly what they had been missing all along. The minutes stretched into nearly an hour as Mr. Richardson fumbled through explanations and half-formed diversity initiatives. The young intern, who had found increasingly creative reasons to remain in the conference room, was now organizing files in the corner cabinet. Sarah noticed how she hung on every word of the conversation, occasionally making subtle notes on her phone. "Let me be direct," Sarah finally said, closing the untouched investment brochure in front of her. "I came here today prepared to deposit $50 million from my company's recent acquisition deal. But money isn't just numbers in an account. It's power, it's influence, it's opportunity." Mr. Richardson's face cycled through various shades of surprise and realization. The figure she had just mentioned would make her one of the bank's top 10 clients. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. "However," Sarah continued, standing up to walk toward the window, "I've spent the last hour watching people walk through your lobby. I've counted dozens of potential entrepreneurs, dreamers, and innovators who look just like me. And I've watched your staff direct them straight to the basic services line, never once considering they might be the next big success story." The atmosphere in the room had grown thick with tension. Through the glass walls, several senior executives had gathered, clearly aware that something significant was unfolding in their premium conference room. The bank's regional director had arrived, hovering anxiously outside the door. Sarah turned back to face Mr. Richardson, her reflection in the window creating a powerful silhouette against the city skyline. 10 years ago, I walked into a bank just like this one. I had a business plan, perfect credit, and an innovative tech solution. Do you know what the bank manager told me?" The intern had stopped pretending to organize files, now standing completely still, her eyes fixed on Sarah. Mr. Richardson's silence was answer enough. "He said I should consider something more realistic for someone like me. Maybe open a small hair salon or a local restaurant. Sarah's voice carried no bitterness, only purpose. That day, I promised myself that when I succeeded, I would make sure no other person with a dream would hear those words again. The regional director finally entered the room, introducing himself with a practiced corporate smile. Ms. Thompson, I apologize for any misunderstanding today. I assure you, our bank values all potential clients equally. Sarah held up her hand, silencing him mid-sentence. Actions speak louder than words, sir, and right now your actions are echoing through every floor of this building. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. This contains detailed proposals from 10 minority-owned startups, each one vetted by my team. Businesses your bank has rejected over the past year. The room fell completely silent. The intern's phone slipped from her hands, clattering on the floor. Even through the glass walls, the gathered executives seemed to hold their breath. So here's what's going to happen next, Sarah said, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight. We're going to have a very different kind of conversation about the future of banking, about opportunity, and about change. And believe me, gentlemen, you're going to want to hear what I have to say. The tension in the room had reached its peak. Everyone present knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. A moment when the tables weren't just turning, they were being completely redesigned, and Sarah Thompson was holding the blueprints. Just as Sarah was about to reveal her proposal, the bank's doors swung open, and in walked someone who changed the entire dynamic of the room. Dr. Lisa Carter, the newly appointed Federal Reserve Board member, strode into the conference room unannounced. Sarah recognized her instantly. They had served together on a National Technology Advisory Board last year. I hope I'm not interrupting, Dr. Carter said, her presence commanding immediate attention. When I heard Sarah Thompson was here, I had to stop by. After all, it's not every day that one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the country visits a local branch. The color drained from the regional director's face as he realized the full scope of what was unfolding in his bank. The young intern, still frozen in place, was now witnessing not just a confrontation, but potentially a historic moment in banking reform. Sarah smiled warmly at Dr. Carter before turning back to the banking executives. Perhaps now would be a good time to mention that Innovatech Solutions isn't just bringing $50 million to the table. We've developed an AI-driven lending algorithm that removes human bias from loan applications, an algorithm that's already been approved by 3 state banking commissions. The intern gasped audibly, no longer pretending to be busy with files. Mr. Richardson loosened his tie, clearly struggling to process the rapidly evolving situation. The regional director sank into a chair, finally understanding that this wasn't just about one wealthy client. This was about transforming the entire banking industry. The Federal Reserve has been very interested in Sarah's technology, Dr. Carter added, placing her briefcase on the conference table. In fact, we're considering making it a requirement for all banks that want to maintain their federal credentials. Sarah opened her laptop, pulling up a presentation that made the bank executives lean forward in their seats. This system has already identified over 3,000 viable business loans that your bank rejected last year, loans that our analysis shows had better probability of success than many you approved. The young intern had moved closer to the table, her notepad now forgotten as she watched history in the making. Sarah noticed her intense interest and made a mental note. Here was exactly the kind of talent banks needed in their leadership. But here's the real twist, Sarah continued, clicking to the next slide. I'm not just here to deposit money or sell you technology. I'm here to buy a controlling interest in this bank. The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. You see, sometimes to change the system, you have to become the system. Dr. Carter nodded approvingly as the executives exchanged panicked glances. The regional director reached for his phone, presumably to call the bank's chairman, but Sarah wasn't finished. And my first act as majority shareholder will be to implement a new executive training program, she said, turning to the wide-eyed intern. Starting with promising young talent who understand both banking and the communities we serve. The intern's hands flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes as she realized the implications. But before anyone could respond, Sarah's phone buzzed with a notification that made her smile. The bank's stock had already started to rise as news of the potential acquisition leaked to the market. The conference room had become an arena where old banking met new vision, where discrimination faced innovation, and where the future of financial inclusion hung in the balance. And Sarah Thompson, once dismissed from this very bank's lobby, now held all the cards. The regional director finally found his voice. "Ms. Thompson, this is completely unprecedented. The board would never—" "Oh, but they will," Dr. Carter interrupted, sliding a document across the table. "Because they don't have a choice. Not anymore." The document Dr. Carter had placed on the table was more than just a proposal. It was a complete audit of the bank's lending practices over the past 5 years. The data painted a damning picture that made even the most seasoned executives shift uncomfortably in their chairs. "The numbers don't lie," Sarah said softly, her voice carrying across the now silent room. "But this isn't about punishment. It's about progress." She turned to her laptop and pulled up another screen. "I'm prepared to offer 20% above market value for controlling shares, with one condition. The current board agrees to a complete restructuring of the lending department." The regional director's phone buzzed repeatedly as news of the potential takeover spread through financial circles. The bank's stock had jumped another 12% in just 30 minutes. Mr. Richardson, who had dismissed Sarah earlier that morning, sat slumped in his chair, understanding how profoundly he had misjudged the situation. "My first action," Sarah continued, "will be to establish a $500 million fund specifically for minority-owned businesses and startups. And I want this young lady," she gestured to the intern, "to help lead it." The intern stepped forward, finally finding her voice. "My name is Alexandra Chin," she said, her voice trembling but determined, "and I've been collecting data on rejected loan applications for the past 6 months." The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Alexandra reached into her filing cabinet and pulled out a thick portfolio. Hundreds of rejected applications, each one annotated with detailed analysis. She had been doing her own audit, working after hours, building a case that perfectly complemented Sarah's proposal. "That's why I stayed in this room today," Alexandra explained, her confidence growing. "I recognized Ms. Thompson from her Forbes cover story, and I knew this might be the moment everything changed." Dr. Carter smiled broadly, reaching for Alexandra's research. "It seems great minds think alike. The Federal Reserve has been watching this branch specifically because of some unusual patterns Ms. Chen flagged in her reports to the Banking Oversight Committee." The regional director's face fell as he realized that the quiet intern they had overlooked had been quietly building a case for reform right under their noses. Sarah's presence wasn't just coincidence. It was the culmination of months of careful planning and coordination. "So, gentlemen," Sarah said, standing to her full height, "you have 2 options. Accept my offer and be part of a historic transformation in banking, or face a federal investigation into your lending practices. Either way, change is coming to this institution." But Sarah wasn't finished. She clicked to one final slide on her presentation. "And here's the twist none of you saw coming. I already own 15% of your shares, purchased gradually over the past year through various investment vehicles. I'm not just making an offer. I'm completing a takeover that began months ago." The room erupted in chaos as phones began ringing simultaneously. The bank's chairman himself was on his way down from the top floor. But Sarah remained calm, turning to Alexandra with a warm smile. "Ready to help me revolutionize banking." Alexandra straightened her spine, 10 years of career possibilities suddenly unfolding before her. "More than ready, Ms. Thompson. I have a few ideas of my own to add to your proposal." As the morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the conference room floor, the landscape of American banking was shifting beneath their feet. Sarah Thompson, the woman they had tried to turn away from their lobby, now held the key to their future. And she had no intention of closing doors. She was going to blow them wide open. The chairman burst through the door, red-faced and breathless, clutching a copy of Sarah's proposal. But before he could speak, she raised her hand. "Don't worry," she said with a knowing smile. "I'm not here to destroy your bank. I'm here to make it better. The only question is, Are you ready to be on the right side of history? The bank's chairman, a man who had presided over the institution for 2 decades, slowly sank into the nearest chair. His eyes moved from Sarah to Alexandra, then to Dr. Carter, and finally to the document in his trembling hands. After what felt like an eternity, he did something that surprised everyone. He smiled. "Ms. Thompson," he said, his voice carrying years of experience, "I've been waiting for someone like you for a long time." The tension in the room shifted as he continued, "Banking needs to change. I've known it for years, but change is hard when you're part of an old system." Sarah leaned forward, intrigued by this unexpected response. The chairman pulled out a worn leather notebook from his jacket pocket. "These are notes I've been keeping for the past 5 years, ideas for reform, programs for underserved communities, plans that got shot down by our more conservative board members." He slid the notebook across the table to Sarah. "Sometimes," he said, standing up with renewed energy, "it takes an outsider to shake things up. I accept your offer, Ms. Thompson, with one addition. I want to stay on as an advisor during the transition. There's much I can teach you about the old system, and clearly, there's even more you can teach us about the future." The regional director and Mr. Richardson exchanged bewildered looks as their chairman effectively handed over the reins to the woman they had dismissed hours earlier. Alexandra was already pulling up spreadsheets on her tablet, her mind racing with possibilities for the new lending program. 1 month later, the bank's lobby looked very different. The help desk was gone, replaced by a welcoming open space with digital kiosks where customers could schedule meetings with financial advisors. Alexandra, now the head of the new Community Investment Division, had already approved more small business loans in 4 weeks than the bank had in the previous 6 months. Sarah stood in that same lobby where she had been humiliated, watching a young black woman in a hijab excitedly discuss her tech startup with one of the bank's new diverse team of advisors. Mr. Richardson, who had chosen to stay and learn, was earnestly listening to a Hispanic entrepreneur's business proposal, taking notes with genuine interest. "Things change fast when you give them a push," Dr. Carter said, appearing beside Sarah. "The Federal Reserve is already implementing your iLending algorithm in 3 other major banks. You've started a revolution in banking, Sarah." Sarah smiled, thinking about the long journey from that first rejected loan to this moment. "Sometimes the best revenge isn't just success," she replied, watching Alexandra mentor a new group of interns. "It's making sure others can succeed too." The chairman, now Sarah's trusted advisor, joined them with the latest numbers. Loan approval rates had balanced across all demographics, defaults were down, and the bank's stock had reached an all-time high. But more importantly, the lobby was filled with a diverse crowd of dreamers and doers, each one being treated with the respect they deserved. As Sarah prepared to leave for her next board meeting, she paused by the new sign being installed above the entrance. The bank's old name was gone, replaced by simple words that meant everything: Community First Financial, where every dream gets a fair chance. Alexandra caught up with her at the door, tablet in hand. "Ready for the next challenge?" she asked eagerly. "We've got 3 more banks interested in our reform program." Sarah looked back at the transformed lobby one last time. "You know what, Alexandra? I think banking is just the beginning. There are a lot more doors out there that need opening." Together, they stepped out into the sunlight, ready to continue the work of changing not just an industry, but the world, one opportunity at a time. After all, true wealth wasn't just about money in the bank. It was about investing in people and their dreams.